Eli Thatcher woke to the sound of horses. They weren't his. When he lifted his head from the rough bed and looked through the foggy window of his cabin, his heart nearly stopped. Dozens of Apache tents surrounded his property like ghosts that had sprouted from the earth overnight. Mounted warriors watched his house in absolute silence. One of them, with a deep scar across his face, stood directly in front of his door. How the hell had they gotten there? And why hadn't they killed him while he slept? The answer lay in the corner of his living room, wrapped in the wool blanket that had belonged to his late wife Sarah. The young Apache woman he had found wounded the evening before was still breathing slowly, but her face no longer showed the deathly pallor of the previous night. Eli ran his hand through his graying hair and felt the weight of every decision that had brought him to this moment. It had all started 24 hours earlier, when he was returning from the town of Cedar Falls with supplies. The sun was setting over the Rocky Hills of Arizona when he heard faint moans coming from behind a formation of red stones. Eli had lived alone on those lands for 15 years, ever since he left the army and bought the ranch with his war pension money. He knew every sound of that desert. This was different. He found the girl collapsed among the bushes, with a deep wound on her left leg and scratches all over her body. Her traditional Apache clothing was torn and dirty with dried blood. She couldn't have been more than 17 years old. When Eli approached, she tried to move away, but was too weak to escape. For a moment, he hesitated. For years, he had heard stories in town about Apache attacks, about dead settlers and burned properties. The army constantly patrolled the region, and any contact with natives was seen as treason by neighbors. But when he looked into the girl's dark eyes, he saw only terror and pain. The same look he had seen in wounded soldiers during the war. The same look Sarah had before she died. Without thinking twice, Eli carefully lifted the girl and carried her to his cabin. She was unconscious during most of the journey, murmuring words in Apache that he couldn't understand. Once home, he cleaned her wounds with whiskey and bandaged her leg with strips of clean cloth. He had learned basic medical care during his time as a Union soldier, enough to know the girl would survive if infection didn't set in. When she woke up hours later, fear filled her eyes again. Eli slowly approached, showing his empty hands. He went to the kitchen and returned with a piece of bread and a cup of water. The girl watched every movement suspiciously, but hunger eventually overcame caution. She ate carefully, never taking her eyes off him. Eli sat in the chair across from her and broke his own piece of bread. He ate slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. They stayed like that for hours, in a silence that somehow felt less lonely than the 15 years he had spent alone in that cabin. When night fell, he gave her Sarah's blanket and settled in his chair to sleep, one eye open just in case. Now, with Apache warriors surrounding his property, Eli wondered if his compassion had signed his death warrant. He slowly stood up and walked to the window. The scarred warrior was still there, motionless as a statue. Behind him, dozens of Apache men, women, and children moved between the tents with the efficiency of people who had been forced to pack and move countless times. The girl in the corner began to stir. When she opened her eyes and saw the scene outside, her expression changed completely. Fear was replaced by something Eli couldn't identify. Recognition? Relief? She tried to stand, but her wounded leg gave way. Eli helped her to the window. She looked outside and said something in Apache, her voice barely a whisper. Then she looked at Eli with an expression he would never forget. Gratitude mixed with sadness, as if she understood that his simple act of kindness had changed everything. Outside, the scarred warrior dismounted his horse. Eli could see the decision forming in the man's weathered face. Whatever was about to happen, there was no turning back. The ex-soldier who had survived Gettysburg and lost everything dear to him was about to face his greatest test. Not with guns or swords, but with the simple human choice to see enemies as people. The girl placed her small hand on Eli's arm and spoke her first words in English, "Thank you." The scarred warrior approached Eli's door with the measured steps of a man who had fought more battles than he cared to remember. Each footstep on the wooden porch echoed like a drumbeat in the morning silence. Eli felt his mouth go dry, but he forced himself to open the door before the Apache could knock. Chief Taza stood before him, weathered face unreadable, dark eyes scanning Eli from head to toe. He was shorter than Eli had expected, but there was something in his presence that made the old soldier feel like he was facing a mountain. The chief's traditional Apache clothing was dusty from travel, and a rifle hung casually across his back. Behind him, other warriors had dismounted and formed a semicircle, their faces equally stoic. Naira spoke quickly in Apache from behind Eli, her voice gaining strength. Taza's eyes shifted to her, and for the first time, Eli saw emotion cross the chief's face. Relief, followed immediately by something darker. Anger, perhaps, or disappointment. Taza responded in their native language, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. The conversation continued for several minutes while Eli stood in his doorway, feeling like an intruder in his own home. He caught the girl shaking her head several times, pointing at her bandaged leg, then at Eli. Finally, Taza turned his attention back to the white rancher. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. "You are Eli Thatcher." It wasn't a question. Eli nodded slowly, wondering how this Apache chief knew his name. "I am." "The girl says you gave her food, shelter, medicine." Taza's voice carried no gratitude, only a statement of fact. "She was hurt. Anyone would have done the same." A bitter smile crossed Taza's scarred face. "No. Not anyone." He gestured toward the distant town of Cedar Falls. "Your people hunt us like animals. Yesterday, blue soldiers attacked our camp. They said we stole cattle. We stole nothing." Eli felt a familiar weight settle in his stomach. He had heard the rumors in town about a planned military operation against Apache hostiles. Captain Morrison had been recruiting civilian volunteers, claiming the natives were becoming too bold, too dangerous. Eli had refused to join, preferring to tend his cattle in isolation. "The girl was running from soldiers," Eli said, more understanding than asking. Taza nodded grimly. "My daughter was gathering medicine plants near the river when the attack came. She ran into the desert. We searched for 2 days." His eyes hardened. "We followed her trail here." "Daughter." The word hit Eli like a physical blow. He had unknowingly harbored the chief's own daughter. In the eyes of both communities, that made him either a hero or a traitor, depending on which side was doing the judging. Naira struggled to her feet, using the doorframe for support. She spoke again in Apache, more urgently this time. Taza listened, then looked back at Eli with something that might have been curiosity. "She says you read from a book. Every morning. Before sunrise." Eli's hand instinctively moved toward his shirt pocket, where he kept Sarah's journal. "My wife's diary. She passed 5 years ago. You read her words to remember. To feel less alone, I suppose." Taza was quiet for a long moment, studying Eli's face. "We understand loneliness. We understand loss." He gestured toward his people. "These are the last of our band. 53 souls. The white man's government says we must live on reservation land in New Mexico. We say the earth does not belong to governments." The weight of the situation began to settle on Eli's shoulders. This wasn't just about one injured girl. These people were running, trying to survive in a world that had no place for them. And somehow, his simple act of compassion had placed him at the center of their struggle. "What do you want from me?" Eli asked. Taza's answer was interrupted by the distant sound of horses approaching fast. Through the morning haze, Eli could see a dust cloud rising from the direction of Cedar Falls. Military riders, from the look of it. At least a dozen men, moving with purpose. The Apache warriors immediately tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Taza's expression hardened into granite. Whatever fragile moment of understanding had existed between him and Eli was about to be tested by forces neither of them could control. Naira grabbed Eli's arm, her dark eyes wide with fear. Not for herself, but for what was about to happen. The morning sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert, casting long shadows across a landscape about to witness a confrontation 15 years in the making. Captain Morrison rode into Eli's property like a man on a mission from God himself. His blue uniform was crisp despite the desert dust, and his weathered face carried the kind of certainty that had gotten both good and bad men killed during the war. Behind him, 11 soldiers spread out in a practiced formation, rifles ready but not yet aimed. Morrison's eyes swept over the Apache camp with the cold efficiency of a man who had seen too many similar situations end in bloodshed. Eli stepped forward, positioning himself between the military and Taza. It was an instinctive move, born from years of protecting what mattered to him. The chief noticed the gesture, and something shifted in his dark eyes. "Thatcher!" Morrison called out, dismounting his horse with authority. "Step away from those hostiles. You're in immediate danger." "The only danger here is misunderstanding, Captain," Eli replied, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. Morrison's face hardened. "These Apache attacked a supply convoy 3 days ago. Killed 2 drivers, stole provisions and ammunition. We've been tracking them across the territory." His hand rested on his sidearm. "And we tracked them right to your doorstep." Taza spoke without moving from his position. "We attacked no convoy. We took nothing from white men." "Your word means nothing, savage," Morrison spat. "We have witnesses. Evidence." He looked back at Eli. "What I can't figure out is why a respectable rancher would harbor murderers and thieves." Eli felt the familiar burn of anger in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced during the war when witnessing injustice. "Because they're not murderers or thieves, Morrison. This man's daughter was wounded fleeing your attack on their camp. An attack on innocent people gathering medicine plants." "Innocent?" Morrison laughed bitterly. "Thatcher, you've been out here alone too long. It's affected your judgment. These people are enemies of progress, enemies of civilization itself." Naira limped forward, supporting herself against the doorframe. When she spoke, her English was hesitant but clear. "My people, we only want to live. To honor the earth that feeds us. We take nothing that is not freely given." Morrison's eyes fixed on her with disgust. Pretty words from a pretty savage. But words don't bring back the dead, drivers. He turned back to Eli. "Last chance, Thatcher. Step aside and let us do our job, or be charged as an accomplice to murder." The moment stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Eli could feel the weight of 15 years of solitude, of grief, of slow surrender to a meaningless existence. But he could also feel something else stirring inside him. Something that reminded him of the man he had been before loss hollowed him out. The man Sarah had loved. The man who had once believed that doing right mattered more than staying safe. "I won't step aside," Eli said quietly. "These people have done nothing wrong." Morrison's face flushed red. "You're making a terrible mistake, old man." "Maybe. But it's my mistake to make on my own land." The tension in the air became almost physical. Morrison's soldiers shifted nervously, uncertain whether they were about to arrest a fellow white man or start a shooting war with Apache warriors. Taza's men remained perfectly still, but Eli could sense their readiness, like springs compressed to the breaking point. It was Naira who broke the standoff. She stepped forward, her wounded leg making her gait unsteady but her voice strong. "I will go with the soldiers," she said. "If it brings peace." "No," Taza said immediately in English, then continued in rapid Apache. Naira responded in their language, her tone respectful but firm. The conversation was brief but intense. When it ended, Taza looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and profound sadness. "She says the white soldier father showed kindness when kindness was not expected," Taza translated. "She says this is a debt that must be honored, not repaid with his death." Eli felt something crack inside his chest. The girl was willing to sacrifice herself to protect him, a stranger who had simply shared his bread. It was the kind of selfless courage he had seen in the best soldiers during the war, the kind of nobility that transcended race or creed. "Nobody's going anywhere," Eli said firmly. He looked directly at Morrison. "You want to arrest someone, Captain?" "Arrest me." but you'll leave these people alone. Morrison's hand moved to his gun. You're under arrest for aiding and abetting enemy combatants, Eli Thatcher. As the captain drew his weapon, Eli wondered if this was how it would end. Not in battle, not in some grand gesture, but in a simple choice to see the humanity in those the world had declared enemies. Sarah would have been proud. The standoff shattered when an unexpected voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Captain Morrison, stand down immediately." Everyone turned to see a lone rider approaching from the east, his horse moving at a steady gallop across the desert floor. As he drew closer, Eli recognized the uniform of a higher-ranking officer. A colonel, by the eagles on his shoulders, with graying temples and the bearing of a man who had earned his authority through experience rather than politics. Morrison's face went pale. "Colonel Hartwell, sir. I wasn't expecting." "Obviously," Colonel Hartwell said as he dismounted. His eyes swept over the scene with the practiced assessment of a career military man. "Because if you had been expecting me, Captain, you might have thought twice before threatening to arrest a decorated Union veteran for showing basic human decency." The colonel walked directly to Eli, extending his hand. "Colonel James Hartwell, Territorial Command. You must be Sergeant Thatcher. I remember reading your service record. Gettysburg, wasn't it?" Eli shook the offered hand, confused but relieved. "Yes, sir. Though I go by Mr. now." "Once a soldier, always a soldier," Hartwell replied. He turned to face Taza with respectful acknowledgement. "Chief Taza. I've come to offer an apology on behalf of the United States Army." Morrison sputtered. "Sir, these hostiles attacked." "These people attacked nothing, Captain," Hartwell said sharply. "The convoy attack you've been investigating was carried out by a rogue band of Mexican raiders using stolen Apache clothing and weapons. We apprehended the real culprits yesterday evening, 50 miles south of here." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Your attack on Chief Taza's camp was based on false intelligence and poor reconnaissance." The silence that followed was deafening. Eli watched as Morrison's certainty crumbled like a house built on sand. The captain's face cycled through embarrassment, anger, and finally a grudging acceptance of the truth he could no longer deny. Taza spoke carefully. "And what does this apology mean for my people, Colonel?" Hartwell removed his hat and wiped the sweat from his brow. "It means you're free to continue your journey unmolested. The government's offer of reservation land still stands, but it will not be forced upon you at gunpoint." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Though I must warn you that staying in this territory will become increasingly difficult as more settlers arrive." "We understand," Taza replied. "We have always understood." Naira stepped forward, her injured leg still causing her to favor one side. "Father, may I speak?" Taza nodded, and Naira turned to address Eli directly. "You gave me bread when I was hungry, water when I was thirsty, shelter when I was alone." Her English was clearer now, more confident. "In our tradition, this creates a bond that cannot be broken by governments or armies." She reached into her clothing and pulled out a small leather pouch, decorated with intricate beadwork. "This contains medicine plants from our sacred mountains. For you, it represents our gratitude. For us, it represents the hope that understanding can grow even in the hardest soil." Eli accepted the gift with trembling hands. The weight of it seemed far greater than its actual mass. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Taza interjected. "Let your actions speak, as they did when you chose kindness over fear." Colonel Hartwell cleared his throat. "Mr. Thatcher, if I may. The Army is in need of men with your experience to serve as liaisons with the native tribes. Men who understand that peace is built through respect, not domination. Would you consider such a position?" Eli looked around at the faces surrounding him. Morrison and his soldiers, still processing their mistake. Taza and his people, preparing to continue their difficult journey. Naira, young and strong despite her wounds, representing a future that might be different from the past. For the first time in 15 years, Eli felt the stirrings of purpose beyond mere survival. "I'll consider it, Colonel." But first, I'd like to ensure Chief Tasa's people have safe passage to wherever they're heading." Tasa smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Perhaps the earth has not forgotten how to grow good things after all. As the Apache began breaking camp, moving with the fluid efficiency of people accustomed to traveling light, Eli stood in his doorway watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of gold and red. The loneliness that had defined his existence for so long felt different now. Not gone, perhaps, but no longer quite so heavy. Naira approached him one final time before departing. "Will you still read your wife's words each morning?" "Yes," Eli replied. "But now I think I'll also remember the lesson you taught me. That sharing what little we have can sometimes change everything." The young Apache woman smiled and mounted her horse with careful grace. As the tribal caravan moved across the desert landscape, Eli remained standing in his doorway, Sarah's journal in one hand and the medicine pouch in the other. Two symbols of love transcending loss, of connections that survive even death and displacement. The sun climbed higher, promising another day of desert heat, but also another opportunity for understanding. Eli Thatcher, no longer quite so alone, stepped back inside his cabin to begin writing in his own journal for the first time since Sarah's death. Sometimes the smallest gestures echo the loudest across the landscapes of our lives. What acts of unexpected kindness have changed your world? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of humanity's triumph over division. Ring that notification bell to join our community of storytellers who believe that understanding begins with the simple choice to see others as people, not enemies.